Setbacks are temporary, but comebacks, they are legendary. Welcome back to the PSI Effect, where we pause, shift, and ignite purpose that speaks louder than your past. This is Nuge, and together with Frankie, we're your hosts in this space, and your comeback starts now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the PSI Effect podcast. I am Nuge. I'm here with Frankie, and we are so glad to have you here in our space. Before we get started, I just want to invite all of our seasoned listeners, as well as those newbies that may be listening to us today, go on to the social spaces and like and follow and all of those things that they allow you to do. So that helps the algorithms and gets us out in front of some folks who may be looking for us and not even know it. So going out there and do that for us, we really appreciate it. We appreciate your support. And as always, before we get in there, Frankie, I'm having a pretty decent week. The weather's been pretty good on my end. I got no complaints with that. How's things in your world?
Man, things are well. I'm enjoying the weather too. It's been a little dry around here for sure, though. But I feel like some of the elder statesmen, stateswomen of the time, where I'm like, man, you could use some rain nowadays. My grass is getting a little brown. So, but the weather's great. Loving it. It's a time of transitions. One of the things that just recently came up is I mentioned before that my oldest son is a senior. So he just had senior night for lacrosse, which is his, main sport, and lots of reflection and reminiscing with him. But also too is a transition for me because this year, I don't know if I mentioned it on the podcast or not, but I was the announcer, clock operator, and quote unquote DJ in the booth for all the home lacrosse games. So that was my last stint in that role. So now I got to look to find some other things to devote my time to, but we'll figure it out when it comes.
Sounds like a whole lot of fun was going on there.
Man, we had a time. I think it was more the musical selections and, my antics were more for the adults in the stands than it was for the athletes on the field.
Absolutely. Well, that's cool. Well, talking about time, that's a pretty good segue into what we're talking about today. And we're going to be talking about wasted time. And so I'm sure that'll prove interesting as we move along, and hopefully it will for our audience as well. But before we jump right in, I want to share a quote. Sometimes Frankie and I, as we prepare for these episodes, there's some things that come to us that we kind of resonate with and like to share. And so I thought that this quote was something that would be a good thing to share here in this space for this particular topic. And it's a quote by Oprah Winfrey. And I don't know very many people who are listening who may not know who Oprah Winfrey is, but her quote is, "There is not one experience, no matter how devastating, no matter how tortuous it may appear to have been, there is nothing that's ever wasted. Everything that is happening to you is being drawn into your life as a means to help you evolve into who you were really meant to be." And I think that's a good starting point for us as we talk about this topic. And so I want to start by asking the question to you, to me, to the audience, how many of us have looked back in time and found a period of time in our life where we thought, doggone it, I wasted all that time, right? Maybe it was a relationship, maybe it was, staying at a job too long, whatever it was, but a year or a space in time where you felt like you were just spinning wheels and just not getting absolutely anything done. What do you think, Frankie?
Yeah, that's real. Just off the top of my head, several different things come to mind. I know we'll get into the personal stories a little bit later in the conversation, but I think all of us have had instances like that in our lives. One of the things it brings to mind with the quote from Oprah, other than the fact I'm hoping I'm going to look under my office chair and find the keys to a brand new minivan like all the folks on her show did that day. But
right, that's right.
You get a minivan.
That's right.
But Oprah's quote is powerful because it lets us know that it is expected that we're going to have periods like this, that we're going to go through some things where they don't seem like they advance our main storyline. but they're building things up. It really makes me think, I mentioned before, I'm a gamer, so all my gamers out there can relate to this. When you're playing certain types of games, they have missions called a side quest, and it's not progressing you towards the end of the game to your overall objective directly. But inevitably, by doing that side quest, you get something, a gear, experience, item, something that's going to come into play as you get closer to that real objective that's going to make things a whole lot easier for you. So that's what it made me think of, the notion of a side quest.
Okay. Side quest. Well, I'm not a gamer, but I understand enough about it to know where you're going with that. And I think the other thing that I just want to mention about, time wasted or wasted time is that, society has put a shame label on that wasted time. And I know that that weighs heavy on a lot of people when they have those thoughts, when they go back and do that inventory of their life, of time gone by, what have you. So, we're going to get into it. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But I just wanted to put that out there just as a kind of a reference point. So what do you think?
Words matter. You mentioned how there's this negative connotation around this notion of wasted time. I mean, just the word itself has a negative connotation. But if we really want to be able to lean into the spirit of what Oprah's quote is telling us, we have to drop that negative connotation, that negative viewpoint on what this is, and just realize that it's part of the process. It's part of the journey, and we don't necessarily have to view it as in a negative light. Now, hindsight is always 2020. When we're in the thick of it and we're going through, oh, for sure, I'm not going to say that you should have rose-colored glasses and that we should see everything as like, oh, this is all great, this is building me into something better. While we're going through, we're going to have moments where we're like, man, this stinks. I feel like I'm wasting my time. But lo and behold, once we're able to get onto the other side of that thing and look back with clarity, we'll be able to see how it propelled us forward.
Yeah, that's good. Because I was going to say the same thing. Like, we don't always recognize what the lessons are when we're living through that time period. But like you said, when you come out on the other side and look back with clarity, then you can kind of understand some of those things that have evolved. But the truth of the matter is that we live in a society where everything is visible, right? If you can't see it, then it's not happening, right? And so we get measured by progress that other people think that we should be having, right? It's not necessarily what is on our own hearts or what's in our own stack of goals, but we get measured by what other people by what their relationship to what progress actually is. And so I think we have to be careful of that and not get off of our own goal set, not get distracted by what other people think that we are doing or what we should have done, right? Because what they see is really just an assumption of what we're doing or what we're not doing, right? They can't really see, they can't see eyes behind the curtain. So uh, they just kind of make those assumptions about what they think that we are doing. Um, and so we just have to make sure that we are being true to ourselves about the direction that we want to go in, um as we discover on our journey.
Yeah, and that ties back to a topic that we've tossed around a couple of times in our episodes, this notion of what are you comparing yourself to? What is your objective? What's the standard by which you're measuring your progress towards that objective? Now, if we want to get to the root problem, the root cause of how we get off course, going back to our episode about the 4 questions, we got to figure out what problem we're trying to address. I think the problem is that culturally and socially, we've evolved into this instant gratification, got to have it right now type of, got to see the results immediately or it's not worth it type of environment. I like to call it the microwave culture. If I can't get it hot and ready super fast, I'm not going to invest my time in it. So I think part of, or a large part of us getting off track and getting caught up in what other people think is that notion of, all right, well, I need to see instant results. I got to have something to demonstrate I'm doing what I need to be doing, something to demonstrate I'm making progress towards my objective. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of the things that are going to move us forward are not things that are externally visible.
Absolutely. So, if we take Oprah's quote, I mean, that's actually what she's talking about here is that, no matter how devastating or torturous, our experience may be, it's not wasted time, right? There's always something happening. There's always something that, we're learning or we're evolving. And, it leads me to this analogy about the Chinese bamboo tree.
Mm.
And, this is something that I didn't know until recently, but, it takes a long time for a bamboo tree to mature. And, you can plant the seed for the bamboo tree and water it in year one, and you're not going to see any progress. But you're going to keep watering it in year two, and you're not going to see any progress. And you're going to water it in year three, you're going to water it in year four, and you're not going to see any progress. And of course, by year five, you're wondering, okay, why in the world am I doing this?
Mhm.
And I'm sure there are times long before year five, why am I doing this? I'm just wasting my time. But then comes year five when that bamboo tree sprouts as high as 90 feet. And not only does it sprout as high as 90 feet, but it sprouts that tall in as short of a time as 6 weeks.
6 weeks for 90 feet.
6 weeks. That's right.
Mm.
After that 5-year stretch, right? And
Mhm.
so, the question that you might ask is, so did the 90 feet grow in 6 weeks? Or did it grow in 5 years? And the answer to that question really is 5 years, right? Because you didn't see anything materialize for 5 years. However, it just takes us back to the quote where, even though you thought nothing was taking place or you thought nothing was happening, that foundation of that bamboo tree was actually, it was growing in the earth. It was creating a foundation to support that 90-foot expansion. And so sometimes, as we move through life, as we experience life, we don't think that we're making progress, but the building blocks are there. We may not recognize it. We may not understand it right now, but the building blocks are there for something that's coming down the road.
Yeah, the building blocks are there, or things are happening behind the scenes to set us up for future success. You mentioned the word foundation. That it was building its root system to be able to support the growth, right? Because if it had a weak root system and it then had all that explosive growth, guess what? That bamboo tree is going to fall over because it doesn't have a solid footing. Another analogy is you think about home building. Anybody who's ever built a house knows that the most important part of the build process is something that's rarely visible, which is pouring the footers of the house to get the foundation right. That's the support that's going to hold the whole house up. So they dig some holes and they pour some concrete and they have to make sure it is exactly right. Because if that foundation, those footers aren't right to support that foundation, guess what? That house is going to bend and crack and may even collapse and fall. So this notion of crucially important things happening behind the scenes, happening unseen to support future growth really resonates with me because it helps give me a new lens through which to look at past experiences.
It really does. But you have to take the inventory. You have to take the inventory of your history, of your journey to really understand some of those things. Because life can just carry you kind of like the river, flowing towards the ocean. It's just flowing. And, if you're not taking an inventory, if not really paying attention, you can just kind of cruise along. And before you know it, you're in this wide berth of water and not know how you got there and not understand how you got there. And I think those are the times when we wake up and go, when we say, well, how did I get here? What was I doing? Was I wasting time? Did I learn anything? I think that inventory is really important to understand.
Yeah. And I guess when we're taking that inventory, do we consider wasting time to just be doing nothing, or is wasting time hardship?
Well, again, I think that the wasted time piece is really how we interpret some of that based on what society says it is. Um, I think that we don't always recognize the growth part of it, and so we do label it as wasted time.
Gotcha. I got you. For for me, it really, it just really drives home the fact that we have to have our own view of what success looks like. Because if we're chasing the definition of success as it's established by the outside world, trying to assess what we're doing, it's going to pull us in so many different directions. We'll never make progress towards the goal. So this reinforces to me that we have to have our own solid definition of what success looks like for us as individuals, not the standard being set by the microwave culture around us.
I like that term, the microwave culture. Um, yeah, and I think that we have to have a degree of resiliency too, because this wasted time kind of plays into our, pause, shift, and ignite framework and, setbacks and comebacks. And when you fall into a setback, I think it's real easy to think that you are wasting time if things are not progressing forward for you. You feel like you're just falling deeper and deeper toward rock bottom. And so I think we have to have some degree of resiliency to kind of push through some of the setbacks that we may experience that may give us that feeling that we're wasting time.
Wonder how this, if there's any, like, there's any scientific data or any research that's been done that kind of looks at how encountering failure and setbacks or wasting time impacts how people perform in the future.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Frankie. There was a study done at Northwestern University where they took a group of scientists, entrepreneurs, and others to try to understand what separates people who eventually succeed from those who keep struggling. And they found that in early career failure, and who hasn't had a time in their early career where they felt like they you know failed, or definitely had some setbacks in the early days, right? And thought that it was wasted time. If you spend a couple of years doing something and you get down the road and look back and see where you are, you feel like you wasted time because you're not where you thought you should be, right? But they found that actually, people um, who were significantly greater in long-term success were the people who just pushed through, right? The people who experienced the setback and who just kept going. They just kept pushing through, kept pushing through, kept pushing through, and they significantly outperformed those who face the same obstacles, but just avoided leaning into the situation. So yeah, there's been some work done surrounding that question that you had.
Yeah, I mean, and that makes sense too. I think back to hiring processes, like when I've had to hire employees to fill roles. The resume is great, the credentials are great, but my line of questioning most of the time focuses around trying to suss out how that candidate deals with adversity and hearing stories about how they had to navigate adversity. Um, those responses are typically the things that tip the scales for me in terms of whether or not they're going to get offered a position. Because by the time we get to the interview, a lot of the resumes are pretty much equal. And for me, it's like, all right, how does this person deal with adversity? Can they take constructive criticism? Are they a team player? But dealing with adversity and ambiguity and being able to press forward, that is an asset no matter where you go.
Yeah, we talked about some of that in a previous episode. We were talking about um, resumes and how employers are looking at resumes now. The resume really explains what you should be able to do from all the time, effort, and money that you spent going to college, right? Resume, that diploma explains what you should be able to do. But also on that resume, if you have some some life experience kind of helps employers understand a little bit deeper about who you are and what you're capable of. And I think that just kind of hits home to what you were talking about how you deal with adversity. Some of those, I like to call them soft skills. How do you understand or how do you cope in situations just as a human, outside of, your education, and what you learned in the classroom.
Yeah. And another thing this study kind of affirms for me, in the context of things we may, view as wasting our time, that study that you told me about confirms that it's just further evidence that our growth and our acceleration can only happen when we're uncomfortable.
Mhm.
We've talked about it so many times. It's a running theme, but if we want to grow, we want to shift and ignite, we gotta understand that we're going to be uncomfortable. We're going to have to press through some of those things. And, that study from Northwestern uh, kind of lines up perfectly with that. We've got to embrace the discomfort to get to where we want to go.
Yeah, I mean, it's a threshold that you have to, push through. And I liken it to, when I was in basic training and there were certain things that we had to do on our, physical training exams. But in order to get there, you had to, one of the things I likened it to was the chin up bar that we had in front of the mess hall, right?
Mm.
You had to do a certain number of chin ups or you weren't going to eat because you had to go to the very end of the line. And if you had to go to the end of the line of a few hundred folks, chances are in the time allotted, you were not going to eat. So that threshold was, just something that I had to break through, right? Whether it was 10 chin ups or 20 chin ups or 50 chin ups, you had to break through it in order to get to the other side. And if you knew you could do, if the threshold was 15 and you knew you could do 12, you crank out, find a way to crank out those other three, right, to get to that 15. And I think, that's kind of what we're talking about is breaking through a threshold. And once you cross the threshold, then, your success is almost, guaranteed because now you've pushed through that challenge. And it's something that in terms of the PT, something that I knew I could do physically, but also something that I knew mentally that I could do.
Yeah, I always say the body can't go where the mind hasn't been. So that being able to mentally see yourself there, to have that right mindset, to have the right viewpoint with which to kind of look back on that situation, that is definitely key. Definitely key. In preparing for this episode, we came across some information that was likening looking back or the notion of quote unquote wasted time. I took it back to a farming analogy of,
Mm.
a field laying fallow. So nudes for folks who may not know, may not be, associated with country living. Can you explain what letting a field lay fallow means?
Well, fortunately, I do know what that means. And I knew what that meant before our research because I just happened to say I grew up in the city. But over time, my experience has put me in paths of folks who were straight up, country living folks. And
Mhm.
so, a fallow field is one where a farmer doesn't plant anything and allows the earth to strengthen really and um, um, to get back some of the nutrients that it needs in order to support growth of new crops. And so it's a period of time where it just lays idle, just, doing what nature does with the earth and, preparing itself for that next season whenever the farmer decides to plant.
Yeah. And I think that's a very great analogy for times that we may look back on in our lives where we feel like we're not making the progress that we think we should be making. Those are periods where we may be laying fallow on our journey, where it seems like something, or it may seem like nothing is happening. But like you mentioned, in a fallow field, nothing's been planted, but there's still something happening. There's replenishment. There's, the nutrient cycle is being strengthened and replenished. There's new, there's insects and earthworms and all the other stuff doing their thing to prepare the soil and make sure it's rich for the next crop. And that's a great light in which to view those periods of time where we feel like we may have categorized it as wasted time in the past. One thing I want to kind of draw out though, and I want to get your feedback on this, Nuge. If we're viewing this as a time of laying fallow in our lives, are we just sitting there like bumps on a log, kind of, watching things happening, floating down the lazy river, as you say? Or are we taking an active role?
Frankie, I think we're taking an active role, but I think sometimes life happens and we just don't recognize whether that time is wasted or not. For example, early on, after I got out of the army, I was still young. I didn't decide to make the military career. However, there were a few years there that I can look back and think, I probably did waste some time where I felt like I wasted some time. Not that I, was alone or downtrodden or anything like that. I had people around me that I loved and people who loved me and, life was, seemingly, good. Um, but when I look back on that time, I think, man, Nuge, you probably could have been a bit more productive with life, during that time. Like there was a few good years there where you could have done some things a little bit differently. Now, was that really wasted time? Absolutely not. Right. Because I was pouring into others and others were pouring into me. I just wasn't doing some of the things that I thought maybe I could have accomplished during the time. And so, I don't think that we're just, like moving along and not doing anything, but I do think sometimes that we are oblivious to what is happening and we can't really put a finger on it until we get to a point where we're taking that personal inventory.
Yeah. And, I just really want to, drive this home with the audience that being in this type of period or laying fallow is not equivalent to being lethargic or being idle. We can't just throw our hands up when things get tough. We may stumble, we may even fall, but we have to keep trying to crawl for, even if we're crawling, it's getting us forward. We're not just going to succumb to the ebbs and the flows of the situation around us. We're going to keep trying to push forward. And even if we look back, we're feeling like we're wasting our time, like, oh, I'm not making progress. I'm not making progress. With time, we'll see, in fact, we were making progress. We were making ready for the meteoric rise that we were hoping to see.
And let me just put this out to our audience too, because that time that you think might be wasted could have been a time where you, I don't know, met your partner. And I don't think that you would consider that being a waste of time, right? I mean, so something was definitely happening. You were progressing, maybe not in the career that you wanted or some other area, but, there are good things that happen or can happen in your life during these periods where you feel like, you've not been as I put it before, as productive as you could have been during that period of time. There are things that happen. You could have met your partner. You and your partner could have began a family. Um, you could have purchased your first home. I mean, any number of things could have transpired in that season of your life. And so, again, I think the personal inventory is important so that you can really draw out and understand what was happening at that time. And as you look back at that, some of that is the foundation to where you are today.
Yeah. And Nuge, I like the authority with which you kind of speak that. It sounds like you've got some stories to tell of times where you may have thought you would have been wasting your time, but now that you've looked back on them, you realize that wasn't the case. You want to kind of get into some details of a story?
Well, I think I alluded to it a little bit just a few minutes ago when I was talking about when I got out of the military, and I was, I was still young, and I was, old enough to do what I wanted to do, and so life was good, and so I wasn't necessarily seeking any one thing or another. I was just going through life. I had a job and, I had somebody who cared about me and somebody I care about. And, so life was good, right? I was doing things, right? But it wasn't necessarily, something that as I look back on it now, as productive as I probably could have been during that time. And so, Was it a waste? No. Like I said, I was pouring, myself into others, and they were pouring themselves into me, and life was good. So, um, it's real easy to say that you wasted something. To me, if I'm wasting time, and really it's not wasting time. If I'm a couch potato for a couple hours, catching up on a show or whatever, is that wasting time, or is that, relaxing? I mean, it doesn't have to be a waste. I think it just depends on what your perception of waste is. And it takes us back to what we were talking about earlier about how society slaps a negative connotation on time, and slap shame on it. But, was it really a waste? No, I don't think it was a waste. I think that there's something good out of every situation. You just have to spend time identifying what that is. And I think if you spend a few minutes thinking about it, you can find how positive, or find some positives in a time that may be perceived by others as wasted.
I like that. Like that. In my younger days, I had an experience where it took me a while to realize that it wasn't wasted time. And for me, and I would imagine there are others out there that have fallen into this situation. I've alluded to it on the show before. I ended up by degree, my college degree, I am a chemist, but I was never a chemist by occupation. So coming out with a chemistry degree and not working as a chemist, not being interested in chemistry, but not wanting that to have it end up being my career. Initially, when I was initially in that state, I was like, did I just waste this? Was this 4 years a waste of my time, a waste of my resources, getting a degree that I'm not using? And it took a little bit for me to realize that 4-year experience, while I may not have followed that path that everybody says you're going to do, is like, okay, yeah, you're going to go to college, you're going to get a degree, you're going to get a job and a career with that degree, you're going to have a house with a picket fence, you're going to have a wife and 2.5 kids and a dog, all that stuff. While I didn't follow that path, I met the best friends some of the best friends I have in my life. I met my wife. I learned how to learned how to deal with ambiguity, learned how to navigate people problems without having any authority. I mean, there were so many things that came out of my college experience outside of my degree that reinforced that it wasn't a waste of time. So, we've said it a couple of times already, sitting back and taking inventory of what has actually transpired and trying to find the benefit of that time was crucial in helping my understanding.
And you said something that made me want to just make a pitch to the audience, is when you're taking that inventory, write some things down, because you probably will surprise yourself of what you learned through your life experience, during those seasons where you thought were wasted time. I think you might surprise yourself at what you were able to learn and what you were able to accomplish during some of those periods. So yeah.
Yeah. And in our conversation, you and I have been talking about these in the past tense, things that, that we've gone through and looked at and thought we may have wasted time. What encouragement can we give to people who may be in that season right now, who may feel like right now they're stuck in the trap of wasting their time on something?
I think the first thing that I would say to folks is that, you're not behind. You're actually right where you need to be. I think, you may be in a season where you're, learning some new things. But you're still growing, right? If we go back to the bamboo tree, I mean, your roots are still they're still growing, whether you realize it or not, or whether you understand some of it or not is a different story. But just you're not behind, you're not broken, um, you're not a failure. You're just going through a growth spurt. And we say that, in children's formidable years, that they're going through growth spurts. And I think that happens throughout your entire life, that you go through growth spurts. And I know we talk about that for teenagers or, young children, that they go through growth spurts, but adults do the same thing. Yeah, I mean, you go through growth spurts throughout your life. There are just things that you learn, experience that you have, and you just learn things. And it's growing all the time. You're growing all the time. And so, you just have to be aware of the goals that you have in life, the things that you want to achieve, and not be sidetracked by what other people think or what society thinks about where you should or should not be. And just remember that, as you're growing, you still have a foundation of things that you learned years ago. It's still part of who you are. And so just, lean into that. And, just know that there's some things that are coming in your life that you still don't fully understand, and some of it that you can't even imagine. But it doesn't mean that you are behind in any way. It doesn't mean that you are wasting any time, because there is no time wasted.
That's something that we can take it and run with it. We're in a slow period. Good deal. Where are you taking us?
So I was just going to say, we can kind of start summing some of this up, and how it ties into what our pause, shift, and ignite framework is all about, which is what we're all about: setbacks and comebacks, through pausing, shifting, and igniting. And so, um, you know, the first step, I mentioned before, is that you're not behind, but stop calling it wasted time, because it's really not wasted time. Take a few minutes to just kind of think about what's happening. And I think that you will easily determine that there is something that you are learning. Maybe you're learning something that you like to do, something you learn that you don't like to do. I mean, it could be really that simple, right? Um, but when you catch yourself um, thinking that, hey, I wasted a year, or I wasted, time in that relationship, if the relationship didn't work out well, um, ask yourself some different questions. Like, what did that season teach me? And this is part of that personal inventory that we're talking about. What did that season teach me? Right? What did I learn? What did it build in me? What did I understand about myself, going through that season? Um, and what did it push away, or what did it take out of me that I really didn't need anymore?
Mm,
Right.
yeah.
Um, you just can't uh write off, the seasons that you go through, because there's something there for you. You just have to dig a little bit and interrogate yourself a little bit to find out what it was.
Yeah. I mean, that's crucial in the pause, that introspection, honest inventory. And then as we get to the shift, that's where we want to start to reframe our view of how we're interpreting the data that we've gathered, during the pause. So, uh, like you mentioned, I wasted 5 years in that career, or I wasted 5 years in that relationship. Well, reframe that to say, well, I was there for 5 years, and now I have a very clear view of what I do and do not want in my next role. It gave me clarity that I did not have before. And man, let me tell you, so often we can't tell ourselves or know what it is that we want until we've encountered something that we know we don't want.
Truth.
From a career perspective, I've seen this, in the work that I do from the technology. When I was still designing software, my customers would have trouble describing what they wanted, and I start trying to do things. And that's why I would always try to work on these short cycles, so I could put something in front of them and they could definitely see something that they didn't want, and that would help them better articulate what they did. So shift that, reframe that thing to make sure we understand what is it that we're actually getting out of this. Try to spin the positives out of what we've observed, and then we're ready to move into that ignition phase, Nuge.
And you really spoke right through shift and ignite, quite honestly, frankly, because in the ignition phase is about um taking action on that inventory and writing down some of those things that you learned through that season, and asking yourself those questions like, what did I gain from the season, that I thought I wasted? What skills did you learn? How resilient were you through that period of time? What relationships did you forge through that time? As you talked about, you built some of the greatest friendships that you still have today, through a period of time that you thought could have been wasted. What self-knowledge that you have, and then just like as you mentioned earlier too about clarity, just gain a little clarity from what you have written down about yourself. Some things that you may not have known, and some things that you've learned about yourself just by simply writing them down. And you can go, oh yeah, I did do that. Oh yeah, no, I didn't waste any time. That was good for me, or that was bad for me, but I don't do that anymore, right? Write those things down, and then you will find through that list is what your foundation is made of. And from there, you can start building on top of that. And, I think that, this whole wasted time thing is really just a good opportunity for us to um, take inventory, take stock of where we are to help us, move forward, to help us go forth and build, to help us go forth and push through the setback to our comeback.
Yeah, it's definitely the foundation. Go forth and build. What was the old movie quote? If you build it, they will come. If you build on that foundation, success will come.
Yeah.
So as we get ready to close up, Nuge, why don't you share that Oprah quote one more time?
And again, I mentioned, hopefully everybody listening to us knows who Oprah is. But she is definitely iconic in our timeline, in our lifetime, I should say. But the quote is, there is not one experience, no matter how devastating, no matter how torturous it may appear to have been, there is nothing that's ever wasted. Everything that is happening to you is being drawn into your life as a means to help you evolve into who you were really meant to be. And I think that's kind of the key, right? Who are you really meant to be?
Yeah. And if we're in that season right now, that gives us hope. We're not stuck. We're not behind. If we want to look to nature, it's like we're in the midst of a metamorphosis. We're in the chrysalis stage before we emerge brand spanking new. So there's light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not an oncoming train.
Thank God for that, right? So listen, folks, if you got something out of this episode, I feel like I always get something out of this episode, spending time with Frankie, out of these episodes, I should say, spending time with Frankie and spending time with you, our audience. But if there's something here that resonated with you, if you know that there's someone that that's going through a slow season or having a difficult time with, feeling like they are behind or that they've wasted time, somebody that just needs to hear this, just send it to them. Send it to them. Drop some comments in the comment section of the socials. Send us some DMs. Just tell us what is one thing, or what are some things that you gained from a season you call wasted or you thought was wasted. And we really want to hear from you. We do go through the comments and we do talk about those things, Frankie and I. So we really do want to hear from you. So please take time and just take a couple minutes and let us hear from you and see where you're at. And so with that, Frankie, if you wouldn't mind, if you want to give us a few parting words and then just let everybody know where they can find us.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to have rough patches. An instructor said one time, life is going to ebb and flow between the ends of the spectrum of happiness and despair, for lack of a better term. We're not always going to be riding on it's not always going to be ice cream and cake and riding on, rainbow unicorns through the meadow, happy times. There are going to be some times where it's darker, but all of those times add together to give us a life lived. And all of those pieces add up to make us who we are. So none of those things are wasted. So we just need to keep that in mind.
Well said.
But to find things for us, all things PSI Effect podcast related, go to our website. This is psipod.com. There you'll find links to all of our episodes, as well as to all the platforms where the audio format is available. That's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, you name it. We are out there. Find us on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe today so you don't miss an episode. And as Nuge mentioned, we are in the social media spaces. We are on Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. You can find us at our handle at This Is PSI Pod. We would love to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, listen, folks, you guys are amazing. You're awesome. We really appreciate you being here. We just want to remind you that setbacks are temporary and comebacks are legendary. And until we get together again, go on out there, be brave, and rise on purpose.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the PSI Effect podcast. This show doesn't happen without you, and you can connect with us via Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. Visit our website at thisispsipod.com and find us on YouTube and social media at This Is PSI Pod. That's at This Is PSI Pod. Until next time, remember, be brave and rise